So that he got an order, and in this wonderful, the designer put his name on there for me. My fictional character, there's Alton Lupo, and he has to report for induction. And he's not like a boot camp, and there's a letter in here. And I've had so many guys who've already read the book email me or call me and tell me memories of boot camp. So I now would like to rewrite the whole book, because some of these guys have some what we call ringtail moments at boot camp that would really be fun for guys to read. But they were all spit and polish. So Al becomes a sailor. In the book, when he gets his notice to go at Vietnam, he said, "But I was the sailor of the month on a base with where he was actually directing airplane." And so they sent him to Vietnam anyway. They didn't care. So I had my story reflect history. Now this is the other side of the coin of taking nonfiction and making it fiction. Remember I said you can take nonfiction from your own personal journals and notebook, your own personal observations? Well, you can also take all of that and set it in history. But if you set it in history, you have to research or have lived enough of history so that it reflects the history and it reflects it accurately. So there's a comparison between Al's disciplined life as a Navy enlisted man and his life in a netherworld in a primitive wilderness environment. I knew I wanted it to have action in which two things interplay. When you're doing a book for young men, you always have to have coming of age. So for any of you, you will realize that that's another reason it's easier to write female books, because females don't have to come of age. Young men always do. It's a traditional thing. And he has to survive the war. How do we know? I'm sorry this isn't a 2-hour thing. And I could say, how do we know Al survives? It's written in first person. So when you write something in first person, you have an unreliable point of view because you're going to have the way he uniquely sees it. And I got really criticized from several areas about doing it in first person, but I wanted it in first person. So he had these buddies he went with, and then he had his own reaction to each one of these guys that was unique. And then, of course, when bad things happen to somebody you love, then he had his own unique way of describing it. And I didn't think third person could adequately do it. So in any time, you are hearing the voices in your head, and you get to choose if it's going to be third or first. Generally, I have friends who like to write in present tense, and they can take a book like this and write it in present tense. I could never do that. So if you are one of those people and you can write things in present tense, go for it, because sometimes, To Kill a Mockingbird was written in present tense, and we know all about that book. So sometimes you would even get bigger notice if you could do it. So this focuses on the hero's journey, but unlike Odysseus and Bilbo Baggins, his journey is beyond his control. Why? He's in the U.S. Navy. So the U.S. Navy tells you everything to do. And the whole thing is that I tried to make this a literary book and not just a bounced off the wall popular fiction. So it has many literary elements in it, and you can clearly see, teachers can clearly see the literary elements, because you'll go, oh, look at that, satire, oh, look at that, all right, oh, look at that. She didn't let that character drop through the cracks. She's got that character still weaving all the way through the book. All the things you were taught in your literature classes, I tried to adhere to in this. So the main story we got to in chapter 5, it has a sharp pace. It reflects interaction and reaction of characters. It has rising tension and action in settings in normal times that might be tension-free. And that's another brand new convention of novel writing. The authors must present to the editors, even in a calm book, tension. And they want tension in every sentence. They want it in every paragraph. And I did a workshop about 2 years ago, and it was a 3-hour workshop, and I thought that I was going to lose my mind because the presenter was a New York agent, and the only thing he talked about was that one word. He wrote tension up there. And he talked about developing tension in novels for 3 hours. And they let us have a break, and he said, after like the second hour and everybody was dying, he said, well, I can see we're running smoothly, so we won't take a break right now. So we just kept going. So this is Al's journey. And so this is also a book that has geography in it. So if somebody's talking about the Vietnam War and where they're actually going, in this book Al went all the way from the DMZ and came all the way back up in here and down here, back out again, and back up in here. And so he had quite a journey, and I wanted him to have that journey. I didn't want it to be too static because I wanted it to be somewhat of a hero's journey. So we talk about the boat a lot, and I'm sorry I didn't think to put a schematic of the boat in here, but it's only 50 feet long, and 5 to 7 people live on it, full time. And in many cases, the guys lived on it for 2 and 3 months. And they didn't go in a barracks or sleep anywhere else. They were sleeping, and it's about 104-degree heat, and then they got in the monsoons, and the book covers all of that. So there the boats were moored stern to, and there's a whole description about them being in the Da Nang Harbor and what the U.S. Navy was doing. And in the background, this is the boat called the YRVM that provided maintenance for all of that. So you can see, I tried to get it all right. I have tons of 50 caliber machine guns shooting in it. And I vividly described the scenes and read it to many people who were there so they could give me feedback in developing this. And so we have some pastoral scenes in which the gentle people have precious children waving and doing things. And these swift boats had to go alongside regular Vietnamese boats, even the very smallest boats, and inspect them to be sure they didn't have any grenades or armaments that were being sneaked into the North Vietnamese. So this guy was all smiles for it. And there's scenes in the book that relate to every one of these slides, so I thought it would be easy for you to see the progression of the book. We describe how they pick up troops, how they use those cargo nets, and how a certain group of men could actually, the demolition guys could actually be fully clothed, packs, guns, ammo, and everything, and go up those cargo nets like it was nothing. These young guys. It sort of gives you a vision of what the guys are doing in Iraq right now. And these guys were really underappreciated because they did so much medical help. They were the only vessel afloat on the canals that could get doctors and nurses and medical people from MedCap into villages, and they would go give medical aid to civilians. If there was a wounded civilian in a boat that had a snake bite or who had fallen overboard or who something had happened to, they would pick these guys up and see that they got proper medical help. So they made lots of friends with these villagers. And this gives you a look at what their commercial fishing boats look like and how easy it would be for anybody to be sneaking North Vietnamese into South Vietnam. It was quite easy, and they had a really tough job. So one of the things that's highly described in the book is when these guys go up the Cua Dai River, which they thought they were going to die going up the river. I did a lot of research on the Cua Dai River, not only with guys who had been there, but through other historical sources through the Navy. And to figure out that the Cua Dai River was a very dangerous place, and I tried to really cover that, and I'm sure that they need to get in this room. And this is what it looked like when the guys on the boat were there. Going right through, they did their laundry on the boat, so the laundry's hanging by the flag. They had morning coffee in 98-degree heat, and you can see the coffee pot they used on their little kerosene stove. This is where they existed, out in the middle of the ocean, with no way to get to land, and people think all these Navy guys were having a really great time. That's where they lived. So there were no women there, and there were no drugs there. So it was a joy to write a book where our military was not getting syphilis and being able to shoot up drugs. Like we all hear. We hear that. That's what the guys in Vietnam did. There's no way they can do it living like that. It just wasn't possible. So they went into various river villages, and in this particular village, people actually kept fish in nets under their houses. And so they could feed themselves basically in case of emergency, or maybe, and there they go, right there, the guy's about to cast off who's holding on to the post. And then the guys in this book spent about 3 months there, and they lived on 9 barges. And they had no sanitary anything. Their toilet was like a 2-holer hanging over the river, the Kulan River, and they were tied up to these barges. And here is where this had been infiltrated by North Vietnamese, and the Americans came in and bombed this out. And then all of this is from Agent Orange that you've heard of. So it was a defoliation. So that's a closer view of it, closer view of the boats, another view of how narrow the canals were. And so there's a huge description in here about the sea wolves, the black ponies, all the different people that they interacted with on various vessels. And then Al, who's in there, describes all the time how dangerous it was, because he had to huddle down in what was the anchor well that they called the pink tank. And this is the view that Al constantly had of, but hoping that a sniper, one of the tensions in the book is he keeps hoping that a sniper is not going to pick him off. This shows you the effect of Agent Orange, and it shows you how narrow the waterways were that they had to patrol. Some of the areas were so narrow they couldn't turn around in them. So when they would go through the villages, all of the machine guns, barrels had to point up. So my intent here was the portrayal of a true picture of Vietnam, the scenes, the characters, action. Therefore, I had to do a lot of research in addition to interviews. The development of believable characters, and they have, if you do anything in history, the interaction of the characters, the setting has to be authentic. If you're writing a book and it's about 1810, you can't have a porta potty at the fairgrounds, right? You've got to have it all relate. Development of believable character, okay, establishment of authentic references to military protocol, vessels, armaments, sounds, dialogue, creation of a believable collusion. We know that he survives, and I was lucky enough to get all these former commanders, captains, and all to read my manuscript so that they could tell me if I really had it all wrong. Because those guys will tell you. And so I was very lucky. I had about 8 people. In fact, I had such great comments I couldn't even get them all on there. And one of the guys insisted on actually writing the epilogue. Now, I think this is supposed to be over, but if you have any questions, you want to start taking this down?